Going live. Be on your best behavior, everyone.
Thank you.
The participants are just joining the call,
Excellent. Okay.
so we'll give that another minute or so to get a critical mass, and then we'll get going.
Okay. Just gonna get mine ready here. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Kate Maynard. I'm the Planning and Economic Development Director with CDRPC. Today's webinar that you signed up for, hopefully it's the right one, is Open Streets in the Capital Region, Opportunities Out of COVID Challenges. We're going to wait a couple more minutes just to let people sign on. So please just hold on tight and we'll be right with you momentarily. Good morning once again. It's about 10:03, a little bit after. I know everyone has typically busy days, so we want to keep to schedule and get going with our webinar today. Again, today's webinar is Open Streets in the Capital Region, Opportunities Out of COVID Challenges. For those of us that don't know us, CDRPC is a regional planning and resource center serving Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady counties. We as an organization foster intergovernmental cooperation, collaboration, and facilitate and manage many different regional initiatives. We work with partners to help them address regional problems in many unique activities. I want to welcome what looks like a great turnout and diverse audience of what seems to be public officials, businesses, planning, economic development professionals from around the capital region. We also have attendees from as far away as Minnesota, Virginia, and Arizona. Welcome to all, and glad you're joining us today. Couple of housekeeping notes. This webinar actually has been approved for credits for those who are AICP certified planners. We've submitted the session for 1 hour of CM credit to the APA. Attendees joining with video and audio for security purposes is absolutely okay. It may vary. What this doesn't mean is you can't ask questions. You absolutely can. Please do so using the chat feature. I think many are familiar with this at this point in Zoom. Or ask questions button at the bottom of your screen. I'll be moderating and interjecting from time to time with your questions. And also at the end of the webinar, there'll be a chance for general questions for all the presenters overall. The presentation will be archived as a PDF and it is being recorded. The links to these materials will be on www.cdrpc.org, our website. And we'll be sending out the link to the presentation as well as an Open Streets resource page, which is being compiled by CDTC, our co-presenter for today as well. So we are joined today by Katie Hammond, who is Executive Director of the Downtown Troy Business Improvement District, Chris Spencer, who is the Commissioner of Planning and Development for the City of Albany, And we also have Liz Kormos, who's the trustee of the Village of Ballston Spa. From CDTC, we have Jennifer Saponis and Sandy Misowitz. So we have a diverse group, really meant to convey the experiences overall with open streets to date within the region. So I'm going to jump into the first slide here. I have about 6 slides until we'll pass things off and get into our presenters overall, just to lend a little context to the overall conversation. So with this first image we're seeing here, just to frame out the open streets movement we're currently seeing within COVID times. I think the first question that I always ask related to things is really asking what our streets do for us as a society and a community at the local level. So the question I think that's being asked more prevalently is, can streets do more than move cars? In other words, what activities are suitable for streets? There's some philosophical and policy changes that communities as a whole have been going through and changing. On the left is a quote that I really liked from the Atlanta perspective, Atlanta Streets Alive, where they talk about open streets.
Kate, just heads up, I think you're missing the slides. We can't see.
You can't
see the slide.
Okay, let me see here. Sorry about that.
That's right. Just wanted to stop you before you get into it.
No, I appreciate it. Let's see here. Okay.
There you go. Perfect.
Okay, so are you seeing the first slide there, open streets in the capital region?
Yep.
Okay. My apologies to everyone. This is going to make a lot more sense once you see the slide I was speaking to. So here's the image I was just talking about. So without covering ground again, let me just talk about this quote a little bit. So this is a street scene from New York City, and they're a community we'll talk about a bit as a framework for some of the open streets conversation. So the quote I was talking about is, open streets are about getting communities active and changing the way people view their streets and neighborhoods. By incorporating arts and culture, we create vibrant public spaces that invite people to participate in healthy physical activity. And the beautiful thing about open streets is they're for everyone, from young to old, people on skateboards and rollerblades to people in wheelchairs. So again, we're talking about an overall subject that has kind of a lot of roots and themes to it. So even in this quote, you see things such as quality of life amenities being talked about. You have things like recreation. You have complete streets. These are all general themes that I see coming through the open streets movement in terms of, again, what streets can do, and typically more so for our communities than move cars, which obviously is still an important thing to do. So what we're seeing since March, which seems like a lifetime ago in some ways, is a real experimentation. I think in a lot of ways, it's been quite freeing. While we've had social distancing requirements, shelter in place, I think people are people, and there's been a sense of wanting movement that is able to take place outside. You see bike sales have surged. So I don't know about you, but times when I've been out with my family or just around where I live, you see in the upper portion here, times it looks like Pee Wee Herman's out with his bike gang. There's just a lot of people out recreating, enjoying the streets, trails, parks in ways that's greatly enhanced from past numbers. So I think there's a greater appreciation and a lot of experimentation going on. So on the bottom right, you have things like the city of Detroit, a yoga class on the street. There's kind of a sense of why not? You have Oakland, California. They have a slow streets movement. And their approach has been to offer many miles of streets to a variety of activities, the priority being on walking and biking, but also allowing cars if they're acting responsibly. So in other words, slower speeds and giving the right of way, so to speak, to people who are walking and biking. You have Paris, for example. There was a lot of headlines and discussion about the miles and miles of streets they've opened up, especially with a focus on biking. So what you see up here is the headline talking about how they're actually billing some of their open streets efforts as a boost to their economic recovery. They're really talking about a 15-minute city. So basically your essentials being available by a walking and biking distance of that time, contributing to their economic recovery. We also, of course, as communities have had a real emphasis on how to protect our businesses, our restaurants. We saw them struggle immensely. a lot of us got takeout, and we're really trying to understand in the moment, as well as anticipating what changes would be at hand and how to support these vital community businesses amidst our communities. So I mentioned New York City. New York City is quite honestly an experimental lab right down 87 from the capital region. So in many ways, they continue to make headlines. Again, the context is it's not just COVID, which has prompted the overall open streets conversation for the city and many others. They were making headlines years ago in terms of changes like to Times Square. Many are probably familiar with those changes in terms of, at that time, a very controversial change to many, changing that street space for cars and making it a priority for pedestrians and other street activities to take place within that area. I think time has shown that that's been a largely very successful activity for the city to have undertaken. It's lended to tourism, to additional economic development opportunities, additional quality of life for city residents and visitors as a whole. So I'll mention too, and I know that Sandy and Jen will be talking a little bit about where the city's going in the future, but they set a really aggressive goal of 100 miles of city open streets to be open to all sorts of activities. 67 miles at last count that I saw are currently open in this manner. Lessons are being learned. You see a balance of many calling for permanent changes, new ideas, how streets should better represent the communities in the future. But of course, you have a balance with other demands. You have maybe potential neighborhood residents saying, we don't necessarily want this through our neighborhood, or concern for rerouting of traffic, or what the uses overall are being allowed to be held there. But overall, I think the point here is that these things are being tried out. And during COVID, there's been a giant spotlight put even more so on efforts. And again, put with that sense of let's try this out, let's try things out of a point of necessity. I think you're seeing some real additional activities and future opportunities coming out of this time we're in. Here's a reminder and start to lend into the capital region point of view. Open streets in the capital region is not a new concept. So here's some examples from around the region, from Art on Lark to Chowderfest in Saratoga Springs, to the Troy Ramble and their Riverfest, to the Victorian Street Walk, also in Saratoga Springs. These are typically focused events where the streets have been turned over, so to speak, for community usage. Typically they're closures so that people have the ability to safely spread out and utilize the street. So again, just bringing back this idea that it's not a completely new concept, but what we are seeing is a great change in how the different portions of activities communities have been working on, how they interrelate. So communities working on trails, working on either connections for all types of mobility, looking at quality of life, looking at additional amenities they can bring to residents and visitors. I would say this is the progression, the next step of what we're seeing, going to be talking about today. Coming down to New York State, one of the real goals of this webinar is to share with you the results of quite honestly, a flurry of activity. There's been a flurry of activity at both the local streets level. So as communities have looked at the challenges, as spring turned into early summer, they're thinking of what are we going to do for our communities to assist, let people spread out safely, recreate, as well as assist our businesses. So those activities have been subject to local regulations. You'll hear our speakers speak about their individual experiences from very different perspectives, to mid-sized cities with different approaches, and then a Village of Ballston Spa sharing that smaller community example and how to get things done at different levels and sharing their stories. Also information to share with you, and I think this is relatively new to get out still, is the state's adjustment in many ways to how to better encourage and respond to the challenges of things such as outdoor dining, additional mobility, walking, biking opportunities, etc. So New York State has actually issued a COVID-19 specific special use permit with some guidelines in terms of what is really being sought in the right characteristics for such activities. So we have within links that Sandy Misowitz is going to talk about later on CDTC's page, resources for you to take a look at in terms of this overall topic. So there's an actual application, and the guidelines have things such as, looking at an appropriate daily traffic volume, which is a lower end as you would expect. They're looking at things like highly recommending a positive barrier. So a physical delineation between the activity on the street or the sidewalk and what might be travel lanes still occupied by cars moving by. So I encourage you to take a look at that in terms of moving forward and whether that should move forward into a permanent permit opportunity for any activity on a state route. The 8 communities or areas listed here are ones that had successfully applied for and received a special use permit. So you have a mixture of communities here. There are some that are downstate, right outside New York City. And the ones probably most relevant to the capital region, Potsdam, Rhinebeck to some degree, are probably the closest affiliated ones. And they vary in terms of their approach. Some have called for complete road closure. Some have been a single lane and required adjusting, for example, 2-way to 1-way traffic. Some are varied in terms of approach, whether it's just weekend times is the most popular that we've seen. But the opportunity has been presented. Up above here, you see kind of an advertisement that the town of Riverhead put out, or Village of Riverhead, excuse me, town of Riverhead, in terms of their Dine on 25. So to some degree, again, this is a notable change. This is not a single event. This is potentially having physical change in activities on state routes within our communities. So without further ado, I want to pass the mic over to our presenters. Joining us here again is Katie Hammond. She'll be first with the Downtown Troy Business Improvement District. Then we'll have Chris Spencer with the City of Albany, Commissioner of Planning and Development. Last but not, well, continuing on, we'll have Village of Ballston Spa, Liz Kormos, who's a village trustee, but also has a background in planning. And then from CDTC, we'll have Sandy Misowitz and Jen Saponis talk about some future resources, as well as implementation resources, as well as funding for communities who are interested in pursuing activities on their streets in the future. In general, what we're looking for them to come through with is talk about their stories a bit. So what was the original idea and the impetus? A lot of them really came out with partnerships. So things happen typically when you have that support of different institutions, your public-private portions really coming out, making things happen. It's inevitable, especially with such a short time frame. What were the changes along the way and lessons learned? And finally, what they plan to keep or expand post-COVID. The sense we're getting is that this is a very popular activity. Communities are looking to continue to progress what might be able to happen on their local streets, or as we talked about, state routes into the future. And again, finally, we'll talk about future implementation and funding resources. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Katie Hammond. Katie, please take it away.
Thank you. I'm just going to try to share my screen. I think you have to exit yours before I can get in, but thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. Excited to be here today.
I'm trying here. Okay. My apologies.
You're good.
Did that come out okay?
I think you're still in sharing mode, but.
Okay.
Never quite get used to this, right?
Yes, let's see here. The meeting controls are not assisting me at the moment. Okay. Okay, so you okay now?
Should be good. I should be able to share this.
Excellent. Take it away.
All right, so let me just minimize this. So today I'm going to be talking about Troy, downtown Troy. We are the Downtown Troy Business Improvement District and have been working with a lot of partners on this project. Oh, is it going to let me send this over? There we go. So what is Summer Square? Troy Summer Square was an existing event that had happened about 2 years ago. This year has transitioned a bit from the original public art concept into takeout and picnic zones. So there are areas in our parks, as well as an area which you'll see in one of these images on the bottom here, where the summer square information is. There's actually a public art area that we've turned into this takeout zone. There's also picnic areas in the parks that have designated circles for picnicking. Public art and programming. So on these pictures, you will see some of that public art, which there were different spaces that were used for programming throughout the summer, and that's still happening and will probably continue. We also decided to close down some streets, which we were calling the pedestrian walk. The idea on weekends to be able to open things up and allow more people to be outside. We also added the outdoor dining and retail use was very prominent in this and was kind of, you know, the new thing this year, although we have done versions of this in the past for parking day and, you know, taking over some of those street spaces. But that was done through a special event permit for those businesses. So those are kind of the overarching pieces of Summer Square. And then to talk about how it got started, like I said, the program had, you know, happened 2 years ago. It was a public art program. It happened over a period of a month. The Art Center had taken a lead role on that program. And the city had helped them to close down a block along Monument Square, which is one of the central locations within our downtown. So the city of Troy was already talking with the Art Center about possibly doing that again this year. With conversations that I was hearing in some of our business improvement district meetings from bids throughout the state. You know, a lot of people were looking at this idea of outdoor dining and how to incorporate that in their cities in a way that was going to be quick and would actually benefit their businesses. So while we were having those conversations, we were also hearing from our business owners and from our community members that they wanted a space to be able to use outside in order to increase their capacity and allow for people to sit outside, to eat outside, and to enjoy kind of activity in our streets. Troy is known for having a lot of activities. There's something going on every single night of the week. So it was a concept that people were very excited about and used to. So we ended up, because there were so many people that were interested in this concept, I, as well as 2 other individuals, co-chair the Rensselaer County Pandemic Response Committee, which is an economic development, you know, interest in trying to increase business within our community during COVID, and supporting our businesses that were struggling. And still are, but working on it. So community activation was one of those main pieces. We also have a committee that's communications, as well as a resources and best practices committee. So the communications and activation committee, community activation committee, as well as that communications committee, worked pretty closely on this project in order to get all the details together. And most of the partners were actually part of this committee that we ended up creating. So those partners, like I said, one big collaboration. We had a lot of different partners on this project. So we worked with the Art Center of the Capital Region, located in downtown Troy. They were originally the people who started this program and were interested this year in being part of it again. Like I said, the Rensselaer County Pandemic Response Committee. We actually worked with Unity House on their ambassador program, which we were able to use their workers in order to provide jobs during COVID, and to be able to have individuals outside that were cleaning tables in our takeout zones, greeting people, answering any questions that they might have. And the Art Center actually acted as a public restroom for the people who were using that space for the takeout zone and anybody that was picnicking in the park. So TAP is one of our local organizations, and they helped quite a bit on the program from the public art aspect, as well as trying to help businesses understand how they could be using outdoor space. Some of the funders of the program were the Local Development Corporation for Troy, as well as the Capital Resource Corporation. We also worked with the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall, which was part of the initiative from Troy Cultural Alliance as well, which the Art Center is also part of, and TAP. So they were definitely one of the people we worked with for the programming. And then Tiny Code did all of our design work. Russell Sage College allowed us to use their park, which is actually a city park, but it's in collaboration with the city, or sorry, with Russell Sage. So we were able to use their park for some programming as well. The Troy Savings Bank Charitable Foundation was able to help us fund some of the programming that happened throughout the city. The city of Troy obviously was involved in all of this, the economic development. Dylan Churek as well as Steve Streichman were pretty involved in this program, as well as the deputy mayor. And then we, the Downtown Troy Business Improvement District, were involved as well in really maintaining the program and keeping it moving. So we came up with this concept of Troy Summer Square, which was taking this original concept and really expanding it to include a lot of different things. So like I said, the Rensselaer County Pandemic Response Committee had taken on this through the Activation Committee and Communications Committee. So we wanted to make sure that we could use these to determine what was actually going to happen. So we determined the needs of our community and centers of interest. So we found that there was quite a bit of interest in that Monument Square area, where it was already, usual to close down those streets. So we were able to use those streets pretty easily because the businesses were involved. So that was businesses and organizations that were part of that. Oops, clicking on it. Determine the process of applying for space. So we worked with the city of Troy to create an extension of the special events permit. There was an existing permit that we were able to add a few questions onto in order to actually make it possible for businesses and for different organizations to apply for space in order to use it for either performances or for outdoor music, for their businesses as well, whether that was retail or restaurant. Outdoor dining guidelines and implementation plans were all created by TAP. They created a nice guide, which I've shared with Kate so that she can share that out with you as well, which shows a lot of details about how we came up with spacing for the outside dining spaces and for the circles that took place in all the different spaces. Design and implement public art. So the Art Center and TAP were able to create all those circles that you saw on the ground. They worked very well together and actually implemented those on the street with volunteers. Determine program and schedule and funding of that programming. So we ended up creating a schedule where Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday we had programming and still do for the next couple of weeks. That programming, Sage Park took on some of that programming with a small version of Rockin' on the River, which was called Rockin' at Sage Park, live music, as well as Thursdays where the Art Center did different kinds of programming all around public art and engaging young individuals as well. Fridays and Saturdays were performances by the music hall. So they brought in local performers and did those both in front of the music hall on Friday nights as well as on Saturdays in the Monument Square area where we had that takeout zone. There was also a group that ended up offering movie nights. So that was a really fun program on Friday evenings. And then the design and branding signage was all a collaboration, but Tiny Co had designed that. And then the promotion was done through Troy Summer Square Facebook page, which was managed by quite a few different organizations. So as it was happening, we were kind of amazed that it had started and that it was going. All the pieces were really coming together as we were working on it. So some of the really amazing things that came out of it, the businesses definitely have seen increased traffic every single week. We are seeing a lot of new faces in Troy. We have a lot of people visiting from downstate, New York City area. We also have a lot of people from the capital region that are visiting. And then we also have a lot of people moving here currently, whether they're coming from New York City or beyond, or from right in our capital district. We have a ton of people who are looking for spaces to live currently. So really trying to locate in our downtowns because they recognize that businesses are open and we've been able to promote that. So it created this idea, a buzz and excitement on the street, allowing local performers to have an opportunity to perform, for people to see each other in safe ways. We also got a lot of local media coverage, which was actually really exciting that the media, they wanted things to talk about. So they were really excited to have a program to be able to come out to and to be able to promote. It also created job opportunities both through the Unity House Ambassador Program, but it also created jobs because many businesses are hiring at this point. We have had multiple businesses looking to hire additional staff because they are starting to pick up. The music hall really, pointed it out, as well as from our programs at Rockin' at Sage. Performers are excited to be out. They bring a liveliness to the downtown, and they've expressed a lot of appreciation for being able to be outside. So modifications and learning opportunities, it was an extremely ambitious timeline. We had a very, very, very quick turnaround, so we were trying to create it as it was going. It definitely took time to get everything moving, and some of our signage was delayed, and with everything with COVID, everything has been slightly delayed. So we were trying to get everything together, but it at this point is all put together, and it is moving. Many different needs. So a lot of our retail had very different needs than our restaurants, had different needs than our residents. So we're trying to make that balance. We had a lot of ideas to be able to close more streets and to be able to close them for longer times. There was a lot of worry about parking and people being able to access different spaces. So we ended up doing a modified version of it in order to accommodate some of the different needs from our different businesses and residents. Weather has been an issue a little bit. The heat is definitely, it's been hot this summer, and the rain definitely affects outdoor dining. So, you can't control it, but it is something to think about. We also had a lot of cooks in the kitchen. It was difficult without a director or an owner of the program, because we were all individual organizations coming together. It was a little difficult to figure out sometimes who was doing what, and who owned certain pieces. So without that one point person, it became a little difficult to really push things forward and make sure that we had all the pieces in place. But it did work out in the end. Competing uses outdoors. So we do have a lot of businesses. They all have very different interests, and they all have different needs. So we were trying to make sure that, all of the different people using outdoors, music, pushes into other spaces. And so we're trying to have a very clear programming schedule, although sometimes that doesn't always work out. And then traffic patterns are definitely something that Kate had mentioned before. Cars go fast. We want to make sure that we have the ability to close off spaces and to slow people down. So where do we go from here? People are loving it. I mean, it's nice to have the outdoor space. It's looking like we will probably extend this into the fall or winter, depending on who's actually interested in doing that. We were supposed to run through September 15th, which is right at the end of our restaurant week, but it does look like we will be expanding that through additional conversations with businesses. The outdoor dining is likely to return next year. It does seem to work very well for our businesses. So it's very possible that that would happen. And programming is always something in Troy, so I'm sure that will continue to go as well. And then the collaborations and partnerships, it's so beneficial to have so many different partners and to strengthen those relationships, be able to work with one another further. So I don't know how much time I have. I'm probably running over a little bit here, but just some pictures of things that happened. This is the main area where Summer Square started, on the left-hand side here. And these are some of our ambassadors that were there to greet people and take and clean the streets. These are some of the posters from the different programs that had happened in the different spaces. Rockin' at Sage Park, a beginner skateboarding clinic, some DJs, different art opportunities. These are some examples of what those public dining areas, private dining areas looked like. A couple different businesses. This was one of the outside performances. A few more businesses. We did have a couple businesses use their alleyways as well, use their sidewalks, and make sure that there was enough space for them to have access and enough room for people to sit there. So if you're interested in the program more, you can visit Troy Summer Square at facebook.com. And then if you want to reach out to me at all, my email is there for you to see. I think I can stop sharing now. Perfect.
Thanks, Katie. Now we have Chris Spencer with the City of Albany.
Thank you. That was great. Really, really nice to see what Troy is doing. So we, in the city of Albany, we've always had sidewalk cafes and outdoor dining, but it was really through the COVID and the restrictions on outdoor dining or dining in general. It was really just trying to find more available space for all of these restaurants. So I'm going to talk a little bit about outdoor dining and specifically sidewalk cafes. Kind of note some of the challenges that we had, the administration of the different programs that we had to deal with, who our partners were, and then I'm going to just go into a different topic real quick, play streets and the partners that were involved in that. So, I mean, we always have this very romantic vision of outdoor dining, typically on, you know, nice sidewalk cafes, European kind of styles like that. But there are a lot of different types. We see it in parking lots, we see it in driveways or alleys like in Troy, courtyards. Sometimes it's an expansion of the sidewalk itself. A lot of cities are doing parklets, which are really using that parking space for dining. We've done a lot of places where we've just sort of pushed the pedestrians into the street, protecting them, but allowing the entire sidewalk to be taken over for dining. Some cases we've used street closures, and in other cases we sort of split where the dining areas are, and we have pedestrians working through the middle of those sections. So, you know, this idea of outdoor dining is nothing new. We've seen that, you know, for many years. So in restaurants that have the available courtyard space, the investment is well worthwhile. They can make this investment. It's not they don't have to set up every day. They don't have to break down at the end of the day. It's their space. They can control it. They can heat it. They can light it. But when you get into sidewalk cafes, it's much different. You know, and this is actually one in New York City where somebody's taken over some space and really enhanced that space. So, but again, you have, you know, all these restaurants have been hurting. So the investment to do any kind of additional outdoor dining is difficult. They just don't have the resources. One of the things we heard a lot of times was when we tried to make additional room, like considering shutting down the street, they said, we don't have the staff, we don't have the tables, we don't have the resources, and we're not sure we'll have the customers. So, but here's an example of one where you've got sort of a pedestrian walkway and you've got the dining. But the issues that we face a lot of times, we're not just allowing people to walk through these areas, but then trying to deal with issues like Americans with disability, making sure that you have access to all of the, not just the restaurants, but the retail spaces in between. And then there are some very imaginative kind of ways of looking at outdoor dining. So this is kind of what you see a lot of cases where, you know, this is not in Albany, but people just have some space and they're kind of rushing to taking their indoor tables and bringing them outdoors and trying to get people there and trying to serve them as best as they can. You know, and it can be a very intimate experience as you see here. But again, so the whole COVID experience in terms of outdoor dining and what you see is much different than what our overall notions of dining are in general. So we've done with our sidewalk cafe permits, we generally have an area, I don't know if you can see my cursor, I don't think you can, but area usually adjacent to the restaurant that they're allowed to use. Then there's the sidewalk area, and then there's that area where the tree wells are. So generally it's a pretty small area. So what we did initially was to say, go ahead and use those areas where the tree wells are. And then we got some, there was sort of conflicting things from the state liquor authority. So we were able to resolve that, just making sure that people had filled out the proper forms and that they had sort of created some separation. And one of the other things too, when we look at all the competing and conflicting regulations, so our typical sidewalk in many cases is 15 feet. So if you look at that tree well area, typically that might be about 5 feet. Then you got 4 feet clear and you might have another 6 feet for tables. If you look at the Department of Health guidelines, it'll say that the pedestrians should be 6 feet from the nearest table, which would put the nearest table back inside the restaurant. So the Department of Health does provide for some flexibility in terms of the local municipalities looking at how that spacing is going to be. And then we started to look at how do we use that space, maybe where the cars are typically parked. Can we put the diners there, or can we put people out in the streets? So in Lark Street, we talked about potentially closing down Lark Street. At first, it was going to be maybe all summer long, but because it's a major commerce route, it's really difficult during the day to close Lark Street. And then we thought about doing it just on the weekends, but then the other worry that happened after COVID, when we had a lot of the demonstrations and things like that, is, just the people coming there for different reasons. Or if you close down the street and it becomes very popular, now you no longer have this sort of COVID social distancing that's happening. So we have to always be concerned about whether we're turning something into not just a dining space or some other space, but are we turning it into a block party that's going to be hard to control and hard to socially distance. So on Lark Street, when we talked about doing the weekend closures, we had to think about the residents, all in Center Square, Hudson Park, all those residents that are there, the nearby businesses, how we get there, how they get their deliveries, how they get their customers in and out. And so we talked about really doing a closure from Madison Avenue down to Washington Avenue, but allowing the side streets to flow through. So here's sort of an example of that. And then we had some private parking lots that needed to be have access. So in order to do this on a weekend basis, we were going to need about 20 sort of water-filled jersey barriers at the two ends, really to give a good protection on the ends. And then we needed about 80 to 90 of the crowd control barriers to be able to close off those side streets and allow the traffic to flow through. Then we have to think about where we're going to stage all that stuff. And then there was bus and emergency traffic notification. We had to, some of the one-way traffic, you still have to have people be able to turn around and flow back out. So we'd have to change the one-ways, allow for that. We had to look at some of the handicap parking that might go away and where do we put that. We also had the curbside pickup. Then we had to deal with pedestrian signage. How do you get the pedestrians, especially where there's parking lots coming through, to know that where's the pedestrian route. And then we just didn't have the capacity in general to do this through our Department of General Services every weekend. So it really became the Business Improvement District and all the restaurants trying to get the volunteers together to do this. And then, in terms of some of the other things, we had the Black Lives Matter mural, and we had to be concerned too, if we closed off the street and tables started going there, that was going to be sort of disturb that experience of people being able to go down there and see that message. So we had to think about how that was going to work. So we put together, the outdoor dining guidance. And then in Lark Street, we put together just a really quick opening, closing checklist to find out, do we have the volunteers? Would they be willing to do this every week? Setting it up on Friday and then breaking it down at the end of the week. And it was a pretty lengthy list. And then we had to worry about what happens if they didn't open it back up. And then we have to get the city staff in there to do that. So a lot of administrative stuff there. And I think in general, a lot of the businesses just felt that they were a little worried about what might happen there. So Lark Street ended up being really about how do we, in the end, give people more space. And it wasn't every business. So we had to do a lot of walking around with the Business Improvement District, talk to every one of the restaurants, find out whether they were going to do outdoor dining or what were their needs. So this is, a case where we tried to use in some cases, the available parking areas, put the pedestrians in the street, setting up ramps, and then we had to get the handicap accessible routes to make sure people could get back up onto the sidewalk. And here you see some of the ramps, just so it's a lot of just infrastructure just to provide that additional space for one business. And here's some examples of some of the restaurants that have really put some thought and money into it. These are planters that are affixed to the sidewalk, but at the end of the season, they'll come right up. But they've done a really nice job in some of these to really try to dress up those spots. And then, on the one on the right, that's sort of an example of where they had some outdoor dining on the left, and then they used that space between the curb and the tree wells. And that pretty much doubled the amount of space that they had available. So that was a huge amount. And this is Dove and Deer Restaurant. This is in a residential area. But that was a huge win for them to be able to get all that additional dining out there. In some cases, we're able to let people close off the streets on a nightly basis. So Druthers, in this case, closes off the street. They move all their tables into the street. They have an agreement with the property owner next door They don't have any deliveries after that time. So around 4:30, 5 o'clock, they close off the street, they barricade it, and the city is not doing any of the work there, which is good for us because we just don't have the resources to keep doing that. But it's given them a lot of additional space. And this is Madison Avenue. This was another one where we considered doing a block-long closure, which would have been relatively simple because it's only the barricades at the two ends. But again, it was really the restaurants concerned whether they had enough of the tables, enough of the staff, enough of anything to use that entire space. So this is one where we allowed the restaurant to use the entire sidewalk and then provided a pedestrian path in the typical parking area. But there's, you know, a trade-off in that too. Then you're losing all your parking, you're losing a lot of those other things that you have. So the major challenges that we had were, you know, the communication, trying to make sure that we're talking to all the restaurants, the conflicting regulations between our own regulations, State Liquor Authority, Department of Health, Americans with Disability, and trying to balance all of those and make sure that, you know, we're not creating conflict or creating non-compliance. Thinking about the equity across the city, making sure that, you know, in some cases it was easy to allow somebody to block off a street, but what do you do with individual restaurants all across the city? So we had to, you know, make sure that we were responding to requests and wherever we could, providing the resources. There were the bids, and then there's all those businesses that are not represented by the business improvement district. So making sure that we're contacting all of those, and then thinking about other businesses, you know, that don't want all that sidewalk activity, that still need to get customers to them. And then of course, all of our commercial areas are surrounded by residential areas. So there's residential complaints about the noise and things like that, the activity. And then we had to think about the compliance and the enforcement to make sure that everybody's actually following the State Liquor Authority guidelines, the Department of Health guidelines, communicating to these restaurants when we were going to start this, administrative adjustments. So just making sure that all these things were being done. So I got a couple extra things in that slide that don't belong. So we worked pretty closely with the State Liquor Authority to make sure that they understood where we were doing these sidewalk expansions. And then we even doing details, trying to create a simple detail that we could have some private contractors quickly make a number of these ramps, because we just didn't know how many we were going to make. So we just came up with a very simple design that could be built very quickly. And that's our typical permit, but what we did, the mayor had waived not only the fees for the permits, but also the requirements for the permit. So we initially just provided permits for everybody who had one the year before. But again, we didn't get into a lot of regulations with this, just making sure that they're complying with all the state regulations. So on all of this, our partners are really the business improvement districts, are sort of the big ones. The area restaurants, the mayor's office, again, working closely with them to try to reduce our own regulations and waive as much as we could as on a weekly basis from emergency orders, and worked closely with the Albany Police Department, Traffic Engineering, Department of General Services, who had to deliver all the barricades, set all those barricades up that you see, looking at our legal department to deal with some of these other compliance issues, the parking authority, because we had to notify them and get their permission if we were going to be taking away metered parking spots, and then again, private contractors in doing some of this work. So these are just some of the examples that you see, and in this example you see, this is not in Albany, but you see the different types of dining, and you see the separation. Now, one of the things the State Liquor Authority likes to see if you're serving alcohol is that you've got some sort of a barrier between the dining and the people who are being served and the pedestrians walking by. So some cases you see these examples. Again, this is a typical parklet. So you see in there, they've raised the road to meet the sidewalk. But, again, this in New York State would be, you would have to provide some barrier on the other side for the pedestrians. On the one on the left, that would be fine for a restaurant that's not serving alcohol, but we'd have to deal with trying to get some sort of designation in terms of that area. And again, this is the one, this image, it looks like a very good way of doing it, but the problem here is that where are the pedestrians? So we had to think about making sure everybody is keeping 4 feet clear, so people, we have an accessible route through these or around them. And so this is the one on the left is one that would comply with that split dining and split serving, where you've got some sort of a designation on both sides and the pedestrians are able to go through the middle. So the other initiative we did, I'm going to try to go through this real quick, was the play streets. And that was an initiative. This is from the Albany Times Union. I'll just read you. So the city of Albany has been closing a number of neighborhood streets to vehicles and traffic once a week. And we've been doing this going around in different neighborhoods, calling it the Play Street. It's a small fair consisting of games, music, information booths, free food, travel from neighborhood to neighborhood, and sets up shop from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Fridays. And I think this weekend is the last one. We've had to cancel at least one because of the weather. So you can see that we have these in different parks, different areas where we've closed off the streets, brought in a number of things. There's a sort of map showing some of the ones that we've done. And really having a lot of activities, food, games, things like that for kids, a lot of handouts, a lot of reading material, and just a lot of information about other things that are available for the children in the city to do, making sure they understand where all the parks are. And this is really the partnership, which was, was pretty mainly led by the Department of Recreation, but supported by PAL and a number of other city agencies, as well as all the other different organizations that you see here. So hopefully I got that done in under 15 minutes, but I think I'm all set. So we're gonna hear next from Liz Cormos, the trustee from the Village of Ballston Spa. We're gonna hear about some great little things that they're doing. So thank you for the time.
Thank you. Can you turn off your share screen?
Yep.
There
you go.
See if I can get my screen on. Can you see that? Hello, my name's Liz Cormos. I'm a commercial real estate development and planning consultant. That's where my planning interest comes in, but I'm also a trustee on the Village of Ballston Spa Board of Trustees. Ballston Spa, if you don't know, is a small historic village just south of Saratoga Springs with 5,400 people in it. Our story is very similar to that of Troy and Albany, but much smaller scale. We don't have the staff, we have the mayor, the trustees, the DPW, police, etc., but we don't have any planning staff. Where did the idea originate from? Actually, it originated right here. On May 14th, the CDRPC had a webinar on COVID-19 economic recovery, and they mentioned that Troy was planning on looking at opening up streets or closing streets for restaurants. So before the webinar ended, I emailed our board of trustees and said, this is something we should look at. So on the following Monday, I'm also a member of the board of trustees of the board of the local chamber, the Ballston Spa Business and Professional Association. I brought it up at the board meeting and suggested that any of the businesses or restaurants that were interested in closing a street should contact the mayor. And, was well received by the business association, and they thought there'd be a fair amount of interest. We started talking to some of the businesses, and by the end of that week, the mayor had gotten some requests to close Front Street. Let me see here. So at the next village board meeting, the mayor suggested we put a committee together and query all the businesses and see if this was really an interest. And he said he would also check with DPW and the police department to see if they were in favor of closing a portion of Front Street. There is a local property owner who owns most of the historic, a lot of the historic buildings that house some of our restaurants. And he took the ball and ran with it and interviewed all the businesses up and down the commercial business district, including Milton Avenue and Front Street, and actually came up with a plan, which is right here. It's sort of took a copy of the tax map and drew on it as to how this might work. So this over here is Route 50, Milton Avenue, State Route, and it goes in here, and this is Front Street. And this is our basic central business district. There's a restaurant here, Henry's, Sunset Grill, Front Street Social Club, a parking lot, Village Hall's here, next door kitchen and bar, our premier restaurant is here, and then this Bath Street. So this made this plan was just to shut off the block here and make this section, the first block, be one way. So the traffic could flow from, you could take a left if you're coming north and go out on Low Street, which then wraps around West High, which intersects with Milton. So this is typical village block arrangement, and this was the proposal. Turned out that the DPW and the police were very much in favor of this. They wanted to help our businesses. We thought they might be a little resistant, but they weren't. And then the mayor also set up some meetings, because one of the issues with closing this section of Front Street would be that we would lose parking, over 20 spaces. There is a parking lot here that the village owns, but there's also a parking lot right here that's owned by EOC, and he set up a meeting with EOC and negotiated a shared parking arrangement where we can use their parking lot in evenings and weekends. He also talked with the county, which is up over, you can't see my cursor, is at the bottom of the screen there. The county buildings we are the county seat, and there's a lot of parking one block up. And both parties agreed to do shared parking with us. So that took care of our parking issue. Our attorney reviewed all the executive order, all the liquor authority guidelines, and drafted a resolution for the June 8th board meeting, where we approved a resolution to allow street dining. So the following 4 days, the mayor put the yeoman's effort into getting all the applications for the 4 restaurants that needed the liquor authority's approval. And actually, he sent an email out on at 4:16 p.m. and got an approval at 5:17 p.m., 1 hour. We were absolutely flabbergasted. We could not believe that we got the approval literally within 1 hour. The first street closing took place on June 18th. The streets are closed Thursday, Friday, and Saturday from 4 to 10 in the evenings. It's worked very well. We did make one change. If you see on the map, Wiswall Park is a pocket park that's right on that block. And it also hosts our farmers markets on Thursday nights. And the vendors were complaining that some of their customers couldn't get to the farmers market because there wasn't the parking right in front of the park on Front Street. So, had a conversation with the mayor right there while the farmers market was going on. He walked across the street to the Sunset Grill and said, would you mind if we change this section into a one-way to allow people to continue through and use the parking in front of Wiswall Park on Thursdays? And the restaurant said, yeah, that would be fine. They still had their space in front of their restaurant to use. And so we made that change. The feedback has been very positive from our restaurants. Our next door kitchen and bar is, we had dinner there last week. They're up to close to 100% utilization. They think this is terrific. One restaurant had a little criticism on the look of the barricades. We just have, you know, sawhorse barricades and orange cones. It's not the most attractive way to do it, and they thought that was a bit of a negative. We hope that businesses around the restaurants would use the space for outdoor displays. That didn't happen, probably because of the different operating hours. Most of those businesses are open during the day, and our closings are, you know, in the evenings. There's a lot of interest in making this a permanent feature. The Business Association thinks it's a great idea. The restaurants think it would be great. We will have to deal with issues of handicap parking. We did create some temporary handicap parking spaces and some pickup locations, short-term parking for some of the businesses that were affected by having their parking spaces removed. Luckily, the village has received a linkage grant from the Capital District Transportation Committee earlier this year before COVID hit. And it's a grant for pedestrian and bicycle master plan for the village. And we've discussed with the project director to include a plan for a potential shared street in this area. So it fits very nicely into you know, the planning grant. And we hope to come back, you know, maybe in another year with a plan for a shared street where it could potentially have no curbs and allow for multiple use in this area. Like Troy and Albany, we have closed, actually we close all of Front Street during our car show, which normally takes place in October. We won't be doing that this year. So, you know, street closures is not foreign to downtown Ballston Spa. And that's about it. Thank you. Oh, let me show you the pictures, sorry. This is Next Door Kitchen and Bar, and they have some attractive barriers, which they used to put on closer in and have one row of tables on the sidewalk, and now they extend all the way out into the street. And this is, come on, this is just a little clip I took. There's Next Door. That's the Village Hall that you see. You can see our lovely orange cones. That's the Midbury Inn with the social club restaurant. They didn't really use the parking area. Sunset Grill. You can see they've got the tents there. And to the right is the Wiswall Park, and up closer to Milton Avenue is Henry's Bar and Tavern. So this is the main restaurants that took advantage of the Liquor Authority application. Oops, sorry. There. The other thing that the village has an arts program, and they have a birdhouse festival, which we are in the 3rd year. It continued this year. It fit very nicely into you know, the circumstances of COVID, because the birdhouses undecorated were made available to area children to decorate. The banners had the outline, and then people could color them in. And this turned out to be a great COVID activity, because you could just pick up your birdhouse and the paint and then bring it home to your kids, or bring a banner home and get them, you know, have an activity for your children during COVID. This is a part of Milton Avenue. So, but at the back of the Wiswall Park is this banner, which the artist that is behind the Birdhouse Festival created to thank all the first responders. So we did, you know, mix our current arts program in with this street closing, and very colorful here. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. That was fantastic. And so hopefully everyone's getting a sense of just the diversity of 3 different communities and how they approached the overall concept and really made unique, creative solutions work in a very short period of time. So here to wrap up briefly is Jen Saponis and Sandy Nisowitz from CDTC. It is a little after 11 right now, so I know from experience some may have had to have gone to their next meeting, etc. So a reminder that the webinar will be recorded and available after the actual session. For those who are able to stick with us, we'll have the last presentation from CDTC, and then we'll have a chance for some general questions if there are any. Sandy and Jen.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks, everybody. So to wrap up today, we wanted to talk about what's next and provide some additional resources and food for thought for where this open streets concept could go. One of the guides that was produced about 10 years ago now, actually, is the NACDO Open Streets Guide. And, you know, this really focused on the transportation aspect of the open streets concept, how to provide that walkability, increased opportunities for biking in your community. We've seen a number of these events from all around the country, even here locally, where we have closed streets for, you know, a bicycle Sunday or a car-free day, and these sort of special events, even supporting activities where you could create more of a festival atmosphere through sports and fitness events and races, performances, etc. And that guide offers a lot of food for thought for, you know, trying to think beyond just the dining and the current climate of economic development needs and how we utilize open streets as a concept. Another guide that was created during the COVID pandemic is the Streets for Pandemic Response and Recovery. It's another NACDO guide. And it really focuses on the transportation and street design responses that go beyond, again, the dining options. And it's something that's continually being updated. So it's a great resource in terms of looking at the national scene for case studies and examples of what's being done. And here's just a few that kind of go beyond the dining. So bike and roll lanes. You could set up temporary bike lanes in your community on some of the streets that are currently underutilized, frankly. Traffic is below normal still in the capital region. It's below normal still around the country. So it's really important to think about how can we utilize this space for other purposes. Managing speeds through slow streets, thinking about pickup and delivery zones, which is a big issue for a lot of communities right now. So there's other ways we can manage street space, again, that go beyond providing areas for restaurants to conduct business. New York City has a great design guide. I know some of the presenters talked about designing these street spaces, but it's really important from a safety perspective. If you have moving traffic adjacent to your parklet, to your street cafe, whatever it may be, how you design that to protect your patrons of these businesses is important. So you need to think about, as some of the presenters talked about, how to not only provide that barrier space, some of which is required under SLA guidance here in New York, but also in terms of just thinking about the safety of the people who are in the street and using the streets in different ways. Kate highlighted the special use permit for that DOT has for state highways and state right-of-way. I just wanted to note a couple of parameters related to that. These permits are temporary. They only last 120 days. They're really specific to streets that have a 30-mile-per-hour or less posted speed limit. So typically your village environments, right? That's where these streets tend to exist. You have to have an AADT of less than 10,000, and you need to provide that continuous barrier. And generally speaking, they like to see these be used for entire blocks, not the parklets and individual parking spaces. So just keep that in mind if you take a look at that resource. And then how you design and where can you get the materials, and how can you even think about designing spaces for, again, going beyond dining, but thinking about temporary bike lanes, walking spaces, whatever those things may be. If you're here in Albany County, there is a lending library that the County Department of Health has established, which they lend out materials that they have available for setting up whether it be a demonstration project, a pilot effort, whatever it might be. Capital Roots is a not-for-profit here in the Capital Region that also provides support for complete streets and healthy streets design and setup. And then Jen Saponis will talk about resources available through CDTC's Capital Coexist program. Jen, I'll run the slides if you just tell me when you'd like to advance.
Great, thanks, Andy. So Capital Coexist is a safety campaign that CDTC launched in 2010, and it really was launched with the objective of localizing bicycle and pedestrian safety and creating a culture of safety in the region. It has supported, we've organized and hosted a number of educational and training events, such as design training for local planners and engineers, also distributing safety materials like bike lights, reflective vests at local events. And then in 2016, we expanded the program and launched the Traffic Safety Ambassador Program, or a mini grant program. Next slide, Sandy. So through the mini grants, this is just a max of $5,000 to anyone from a local government, first responders, to nonprofits. And we've provided these small grants to help kind of meet communities where they're at. These entities know what the needs are in their communities. They know where the gaps in perhaps safety or education are. So we've been able to fund about 32 projects since 2016. And it's been everything from walking school buses, slow down campaigns, group rides, helmet giveaways, bike skills trainings. But one thing that we've seen a lot of nonprofits and even local governments request funding for are pop-ups, demonstrations, pilots, and quick build safety projects. Next slide, Sandy. So through our Capital Coexist program, we've been able to support a number of these demonstration projects that are similar to some of the open streets projects we saw earlier. And we've really been able to help communities and people envision how the street might be able to look and operate just with some low-cost materials like paint and temporary materials. So we've helped the Schenectady pedestrian enhancement safety demonstration a couple of years ago. Capital Roots did some safety education, checkpoints in Cohoes, a temporary bike lane in Niskayuna, a temporary cycle track in Saratoga Springs, and some of Troy's parklet and other demonstration projects. So we solicit for these projects on an annual basis, usually at the end of every year for the projects for the next year. So if you are interested, you can touch base with me or just be on the lookout for information, and we'd be happy to help or even just share some best practices from previously funded projects.
And our final slide today, I should have said at the beginning, the Capital District Transportation Committee, for those who aren't familiar with us, we're the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Capital District, and we provide federal transportation funding to various projects, plans, and programs in the region, serving the counties of Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady. You know, we have set up and will continue to add to an Open Streets resource webpage in which we will compile certainly all the materials that everyone mentioned today, provide some additional links to other communities who are undertaking open streets programs in other parts of the state and in the country. We didn't even talk about Saratoga Springs, Cohoes. There's a number of communities here locally that are pursuing these in different ways. And there's been no greater time and no greater opportunity to rethink street space, even in terms of transportation, given that our overall regional mobility in terms of motor vehicle traffic is down. It gives us the opportunity to test out new street designs without having to make that permanent investment, whether that be through paint, through temporary barriers, what have you. So we encourage you to take a look at this resource page. If you have information to contribute to it, please send that along to us. And we look forward to continuing to work with all of you on furthering this discussion and trying to make some big changes and making them even perhaps permanent in the long term. So with that, I will thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Kate.
Thank you, Sandy, and all our panelists. That was a lot of information. I think it showcases the various efforts, the resources available, and hopefully those of us who have joined us as attendees are taking something away with you. We do have a few minutes that we'll provide if anyone has any questions at this point. Again, we realize that's a lot of information to throw at you through the various presentations, etc. But if you have any questions, please put that in the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. We can take a look and respond to anything that you may have. And one thing to note is the City of Cohoes. Deborah, thank you for sending on about the Eat in the Street events that the city's been hosting from the Local Development Corporation. So as I mentioned, if you provide a link, we're happy to add that to the resource page that Sandy just touched on, so we can get even more comprehensive information of what's going on out there. We see that's one of the values of a webinar like this today, is a chance to cross paths and understand kind of more the details of approaches and how things have worked, and have a sharing of those experiences and best practices. So we do have a question from James Reeks, and it makes a lot of sense, especially in our climate, which is, how do you see this playing out as winter is coming? That's almost like a Game of Thrones reference there. Let's see, from the community's perspective, does anyone want to chime in terms of their plans? I know that I think Katie, just to reflect what she had said, notes they'll continue into the fall, potentially winter. Any thoughts from the panelists in terms of the seasonality coming in?
I think many of the bids throughout upstate New York are starting to talk through, how can you provide outdoor dining during the winter, looking at heaters and other things that would make it easier to be outside for longer periods of time. And then also structures of some sort that could be temporarily built. I think there's going to have to be some, understanding that it may not be the right option for all people. For all businesses. So definitely trying to think through different options for every business type, and to continue to create walkability and getting people to continue to be on the streets during the winter. So maybe promotion or creating some kinds of activities that encourage people to be out still during that slower time.
Yeah, I would just go ahead, Liz.
I was just saying, events like Chowderfest in January show that people will come out and eat outdoors in the winter.
Good point.
I think the challenge for the city of Albany is, again, with any city in this area is the snow. And, the heaters are one thing, but then, you look at where we've created these, taken over the parking lanes and put up some barriers, and then you have to think about how do you remove the snow from there. Or where does the snow go? So I think the idea of being flexible in terms of allowing some temporary structures, I think, is something that we'll be looking into. But or additional space that in courtyards or parking lots. But the actual street area is going to be very difficult to carry that on through the winter.
Just from a general perspective too, I think if we look to our neighbors to the north or other countries, there is kind of a robust culture, I guess you would say, where you do continue outdoor activities more into the winter months. So that sense of if there's a desire to further that, I do think there's a lot of good examples out there to continue looking at and develop what works best for each individual community, moving forward.
Kate, I think that's also important to note that each community is extremely different from one another. So while some things work among all, like even outdoor dining, I know talking to Jim Salango in Schenectady, that's not necessarily something that their community was all that interested in, because they have a lot of patio space, because they have a lot of parking lots. It was easier for them to move into those spaces versus the streets. So really being flexible as to what your businesses are saying and what is needed from your community.
That's a great point. We do have a question coming in from Renee Schur hope I pronounced that right, from the village of Kinderhook. And she asked, can you provide tips about how and what government entity to get access to timely answers to questions about putting out restaurant tables for businesses, selling liquor along the area next to the sidewalk on a state route? Is that allowable at this time, or is there special permitting required? You digest that a little bit. You put a lot in your question, Renee. Let me make sure we're getting the heart of what you're looking for here. Okay, so are you kind of more talking about what might be the state liquor authority provisions, which I think would apply here? If one of our panelists wants to take that on who has direct experience working through that, please do.
You can, as a municipality, depends on what or who's submitting applications, but as a municipality, you can submit an SLA permit for your businesses, and then they would provide additional information. So you can do that. That's an option. Otherwise, if you have businesses that have access to private spaces, it's easier for them to apply themselves. But the SLA website does have a full page that explains that process.
So you're kind of noting, Katie, that you can bundle an application, either municipal or say a bid can actually provide that service to coordinate versus each individual restaurant having to go through that process.
Yeah, the municipality is able to bundle them. And then you can submit all those applications in one. You can also add additional applications if people want to add them on. There are different dates for SLA permitting. So it only goes until a certain date, but they continue to expand that or extend that. So right now, I think they just extended it, but I'm not sure the date exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, we bundled the 4 restaurants that wanted to serve liquor into one, and the mayor put it all together. That was efficient for us.
In terms of the piece on the state route, the guidance from NYSDOT is to contact the regional traffic engineer. I believe you are within Region 1. And I'll make the regional engineer, traffic engineer contact information available on the Open Streets webpage.
The SLA had also extended the space that you could move into. It used to have to be adjacent space. It still does have to be, but you can have, there's changes to some of the language in order for you to move into those sidewalk, also into some of those parking spaces.
I think also the SLA has different things. If the space that you're using is in front and adjacent, you don't really require anything additional. It'd just be your typical sidewalk cafe. But then if you're going to extend and have a pedestrian path through the middle, that you have to do an extension permit. Or if the space is next to the restaurant, like on a side yard or side street, or that would also comply. I think what they were most apprehensive about were spaces where it might be next door. So you've got a restaurant and then the building next door might be vacant. So you're going to allow your sidewalk cafe over there. So in those cases, the municipality has to sort of take the responsibility because the state liquor authority doesn't want jurisdiction in those. At least that was my understanding. So you have to agree that you're going to enforce those regulations.
Changing gears a little bit, we have another more comment, and it's a very good one from Deborah in Colony. She's concerned about, or the community's concerned about, possible shutdowns again and the effect on our small businesses. And she's pointing out that they're starting to look at some form of local takeout service or sponsoring a takeout night for the restaurants where people can pre-order, and the delivery service does certain drop-off times, say at a specific location around that community. They sponsored Takeout Week before, and that was successful. So that's an excellent point that obviously Open Streets has evolved as one way to respond to the economic issues that have been facing our private business community during these times. So it's going to continue to require, especially since we don't have a crystal ball in terms of how things are going, creativity, flexibility, and new thoughts, and continuing forward to support businesses in our communities in different ways, especially as we move forward. So good point, Deborah.
Yeah, I think even with the street closings, you have to allow for spots where people can stop and go pick up. We have on that same block a deli and a very popular liquor store. So we created short-term parking, temporary short-term parking for people to come down, park, go get their sandwich, go home. because that's still, you know, a big activity, you know, here in the village. And the business association also has had promotions to encourage people to take out.
That's great. So with that said, we're coming up on 11:30. So at this point, I really want to thank the panelists for their time and the ability to provide a great summary of your efforts and some thoughtful partnerships, and just really describing what they've been able to do in a short time frame within their communities. Also, CDTC, thank you for participating and co-sponsoring. And thank you to everyone who's attended. We hope you're taking, again, something away with you. Please let us know if you have additional questions or any comments in the future, or you can reach out directly to the panelists. I think that's okay. Is everyone okay with that?
Sure.
In terms of additional items. So thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you again soon for a future CDRPC webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.